In districts where 3 Imperial services withdraw within a standard year, 73% of detected cult recruits are found. The statistic appears in administratum ledgers without commentary, filed between grain shortfall reports and conscription quotas. Scarcity writes the first catechism. Ration distribution centers close when supply lines redirect to active war zones. Housing lotteries operate with 40% failure rates, leaving families in underhive warrens where recycled air carries the taste of rust and decay. Conscription sweeps extract primary earners with bureaucratic precision, targeting males aged 16 to 45, regardless of dependents left behind. Medici triage protocols code the elderly and chronically ill as expendable, a resource allocation decision that costs nothing and spends lives efficiently. These conditions create what cult recruitment primers term substrate populations, communities stripped of institutional support and desperate for alternatives. The Imperium functions as a vast logistics network, moving resources from periphery to center, ore to forges, tithes to void ships, bodies to battlefields. When supply chains break, other networks emerge to fill the gaps. Cults approach these populations not as predators, but as alternative service providers. They begin with logistics, not sermons. A stranger appears with protein bars when the ration hall closes. Medicine arrives when the Medici withdraws. Employment offers surface when conscription sweeps leave positions vacant. Each intervention follows documented protocols found in seized cult primers. 4 favors free, the 5th binds forever. Imperial forensic teams catalogue a consistent marker on recovered cult remains, small ritual scars disguised as inoculation marks, present on 68% of examined bodies. The scarification follows precise geometric patterns that vary by cult affiliation, but maintain uniform depth and healing characteristics. These marks represent the end point of a recruitment process that transforms charity into bondage through carefully calibrated psychological manipulation. The cults understand Imperial failure patterns intimately. Power rationing creates unlit corridors perfect for clandestine meetings. Shift system fatigue narrows judgment to immediate relief. Ecclesiarchy shrines run short of votive oil. Congregants substitute cooking fat and choke on acrid smoke. Each institutional withdrawal opens space where different authorities can establish credibility through competent service delivery. Treat this as supply chain analysis. Inputs, hunger, cold, bureaucratic denial, medical abandonment. Processing, favors calibrated to specific deficits, psychological profiling, graduated obligation structures. Outputs, obedience conditioned through ritual scarification, bodies prepared for tasks no Imperial citizen should perform. The language surrounding cult recruitment employs devotional terminology, but the underlying system operates on transactional principles. Promises carry hidden ledgers. Hope becomes credit extended at predatory interest rates. The shrine and the warehouse share operational frameworks. We will trace this progression from promise to enslavement through institutional, psychological, and spiritual lenses. The examination begins with the intelligence networks that identify potential recruits, mapping individual desperation with military precision. In every queue, in every Medici line, in every housing lottery, eyes observe and categorize. They know exactly whom to approach, when vulnerability peaks, and what specific promises will prove irresistible. Before the first favor changes hands, someone must select the debtor carefully. The eyes that catalogue desperation work from positions of invisible authority. Cult scouts embed in Imperial service roles, where observation appears routine. Soup kitchen volunteers ladling recycled protein paste. Medici porters managing queue positions. Labor exchange clerks processing work applications. These positions offer systematic access to psychological vulnerability data while maintaining perfect camouflage within Imperial bureaucracy. Intelligence gathering follows documented protocols recovered from purged cells. Operatives maintain handwritten ledgers recording individual grievances, failed petition attempts, and institutional betrayals. Each entry receives classification codes: financial isolation, authority resentment, medical abandonment, spiritual crisis, cross-referenced against optimal approach timing. These profiles become recruitment targeting systems that rival administratum census operations in scope and exceed them in precision. The deficit mapping process exploits Imperial record-keeping inefficiencies systematically. Census data updates lag years behind population changes, creating documentation gaps where people exist but lack official recognition. Birth registrations require fees many cannot afford. Death certificates go unfiled when bodies disappear in industrial accidents or underhive violence. These invisible populations become priority targets, individuals who won't be missed immediately if they vanish into cult networks. Cult handlers cross-reference observations with stolen administratum files to predict crisis timing. Conscription lists leak from corrupt clerks weeks before official notification. Eviction orders circulate through information brokers. Medical prognosis reports find their way to cult intelligence networks. This advance warning allows precise positioning of agents during maximum vulnerability periods. Psychological research conducted in heretical facilities identifies recruitment windows, optimal 72-hour periods following traumatic events when emotional defenses collapse. Child mortality from treatable disease opens the window. Unemployment notification triggers the countdown. Arbitrary arrest starts the timer. Within this window, resistance craters and promises become indistinguishable from rescue. Confession booths provide particularly valuable intelligence sources. Ecclesiarchy protocols require priestly secrecy, but many clergy struggle with stim addiction that makes them vulnerable to cult infiltration. Compromised priests report congregant confessions through coded administrative communications. Personal sins become recruitment profiles, cataloging shame, guilt, and spiritual desperation. Arbeits patrol patterns inadvertently assist cult operations by creating predictable enforcement gaps. Standard rotations leave districts unmonitored during specific periods. Sweeps that remove community leaders create power vacuums cults exploit by positioning agents as alternative authority figures. The Imperial focus on reactive punishment rather than preventive support leaves populations vulnerable to organizations offering proactive assistance. Communication protocols indicate coordination beyond local operations. Recruitment primers use standardized terminology across multiple sectors. Assessment criteria demonstrate advanced behavioral analysis capabilities. Intelligence sharing suggests real-time coordination between geographically separated cult groups. This surveillance infrastructure transforms charity into precision psychological warfare. Every approach carries detailed background research. Every promise addresses specifically catalogued needs. The helpful stranger knows exactly what you need before you ask, because someone has been watching, recording, and calculating the precise moment when help becomes enslavement. The Watchers do not simply observe. They schedule contact like logisticians moving freight. Within the 72-hour vulnerability window, an agent appears who speaks the correct dialect, wears appropriate work identification, and carries precisely what the psychological profile predicted you would need. No sermons, no symbols, just practical solutions delivered with bureaucratic efficiency. Initial contact scenarios exploit routine, Imperial failures with surgical precision. Food distribution delays create opportunities for agents carrying supplementary rations. Medical appointment cancellations allow cult-trained personnel to offer basic treatment. Housing lottery rejections coincide with helpful strangers mentioning alternative accommodation options. Each intervention addresses immediate crisis while establishing credibility through competent service delivery that Imperial institutions cannot match. The agents themselves undergo careful selection for their ability to project empathy while blending seamlessly into target environments. Former laborers, disillusioned scribes, even ex-ecclesiarchy acolytes, individuals who understand Imperial bureaucracy intimately and can navigate its failures professionally. Their appeals follow personalized scripts crafted from gathered intelligence data. Ambitious individuals receive advancement, opportunities within legitimate-appearing organizations. Isolated persons encounter invitations to community gatherings focused on mutual support. Those nursing grievances against Imperial authority hear validation and promises of justice delivered in measured, reasonable tones. In Hive Tertius Sector K7, Administratum Service withdrawal left 40,000 residents without access to official complaint processing, permit applications, or dispute resolution mechanisms. Cult mutual aid societies filled these gaps within weeks, establishing alternative bureaucratic systems that processed requests efficiently while gathering detailed personal information on participants. The societies operated from converted storage facilities, using stolen administratum forms, modified with subtle alterations. Processing fees remained minimal compared to official channels. Response times averaged 3 days versus months for legitimate applications. Citizens began preferring cult services over Imperial institutions due to superior performance and genuine customer consideration. The contrast was deliberate. Cults positioned themselves not as opposition, but as competent alternatives, delivering what Imperial offices promised, but failed to provide. This positioning avoided triggering Imperial law enforcement attention, while undermining institutional credibility through practical demonstration of inadequacy. The charity follows documented protocols. 3 initial favors carry no apparent obligations: food, medicine, employment referrals, protection from creditors. Each favor arrives with minimal ritual elements framed as administrative requirements. Sign your full name, date of birth, place of origin. Speak the names clearly for accurate record-keeping. Place a thumb on the ink pad beside the ledger entry. The community must know whom it helps, agents explain, using bureaucratic cadence that makes the process feel officially sanctioned. Quality control ensures consistent service delivery across multiple operations. Cult handlers supervise agent performance through regular evaluation protocols. Failed approaches receive analysis and correction. Successful techniques spread through communication networks to other cells. The systematic approach transforms recruitment from random predation into industrial-scale conversion processing. Recipients experience genuine relief and develop emotional attachment to benefactors who demonstrate competence Imperial institutions lack. The helpful stranger knows exactly what you need before you ask, because someone has been watching, recording, and calculating the precise moment when help becomes obligation. Each favor carries hidden observation requirements, continuous behavioral monitoring, designed to identify optimal moments for deeper commitment. The promise ladder begins its ascent. 4 favors free, the 5th binds forever. The promise ladder's 4th rung transforms charity into theology through carefully constructed frameworks that make heresy appear as practical wisdom. Cult handlers deploy patron-specific approaches calibrated to psychological profiles gathered during earlier contact phases, each chaos power offering distinct value propositions designed to exploit particular vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Sentient cells target ambitious individuals trapped by Imperial bureaucracy, positioning themselves as alternative advancement networks. Agents provide genuine insider knowledge about promotion requirements, administrative shortcuts, and influential contacts within legitimate organizations. Recipients experience measurable career progress that validates cult competence while creating dependency on continued guidance. The knowledge arrives wrapped in scholarly discourse that frames Imperial inefficiency as institutional blindness rather than necessary order. Nurgle's representatives approach populations suffering chronic illness, aging, or medical abandonment. They offer healing through traditional remedies, combining legitimate medical knowledge with minor warp manipulations. Patients experience genuine relief from conditions Imperial Medicae declared untreatable, accompanied by community integration through support groups that provide social connection Imperial institutions cannot match. The healing comes with acceptance of physical imperfection as spiritual strength. Slaneshi networks infiltrate entertainment districts and social hierarchies, promising elevated status through exclusive cultural societies. They deliver genuine access to luxury goods, artistic experiences, and social connections previously beyond participants' reach. The experiences create powerful psychological attachment while gradually normalizing behaviors that violate Imperial moral codes through incremental boundary erosion. Corner-to groups establish protection services in violent neighborhoods, offering genuine security from gangs, predators, and corrupt enforcers. They demonstrate competence through measured violence that eliminates actual threats while building reputation for reliable results. Protected communities experience measurable safety improvements, contrasting sharply with ineffective Arbeitsresponses. Each approach incorporates soft miracle techniques, minor warp cantrips, disguised as exceptional luck that validate cult claims without triggering Imperial detection protocols. Bureaucratic delays resolve unexpectedly in clients' favor. Chronic pain subsides during cult gatherings. Social encounters feel serendipitous, but follow carefully planned scripts. Machine spirits respond to whispered canticles. These coincidences accumulate into personal validation of cult benevolence. The ritual scarification process begins during this phase, disguised as protective inoculations against local disease outbreaks or industrial hazards. Cult medical personnel use sterile techniques and legitimate analgesics to create positive associations with the procedure. The scarification follows geometric patterns keyed to individual voice patterns recorded during earlier favor transactions, embedding control sigils that respond to specific vocal frequencies and emotional states. Catechetical progression accompanies each favor through gradual introduction of alternative theological frameworks. Imperial doctrine receives subtle criticism through practical demonstration of its failures. Cult beliefs appear as reasonable responses to observable imperial inadequacies rather than heretical alternatives. Each favor requires minor ritual participation, framed as administrative requirements, speaking names clearly for accurate records, breathing steadily during medical procedures, signing documents with full biographical details. The progression exploits cognitive biases systematically. Confirmation bias reinforces positive cult experiences, while dismissing contradictory evidence as imperial propaganda. Sunk cost fallacy prevents abandonment of increasingly valuable relationships. Authority bias transfers imperial institutional respect to cult leadership through demonstrated competence. Recipients begin experiencing subtle physiological changes as scarification sites respond to emotional states. Comfort increases when expressing gratitude toward benefactors. Discomfort develops when questioning cult motives. The conditioning operates below conscious awareness while preparing subjects for deeper commitment phases, where assistance acquires prices that cannot be negotiated. The physiological conditioning creates perfect timing for the transition from recipient to participant, when assistance transforms into obligation through carefully orchestrated scenarios that force choices between cult loyalty and imperial law. The scarification sites now respond more actively to emotional states, causing discomfort when considering refusal and relief when accepting requests from benefactors who have never failed you. This is the service ladder. Each rung appears as courtesy rather than cost, wrapped in the language of reciprocity and community support. Attend a meeting to help others navigate bureaucratic forms. Carry sealed packages between locations because volunteers are short-handed. Deliver messages to clerks who owe the community kindness. The boundary between aid and complicity erodes through routine participation that feels natural and necessary. Cult handlers manufacture crises to test loyalty, while creating shared guilt that prevents future betrayal. A debt collector appears at your door, theatrical and threatening, then withdraws when you recite a phrase provided at last week's gathering. The relief is genuine. The stagecraft remains invisible. Medical shortages strike your district, and the only available antibiotics sit in a warehouse you help unlock after curfew. The rescued child breathes normally. Your record now shows curfew violations and unauthorized facility access. Tasks escalate systematically through graduated illegality and moral compromise. Passive assistance becomes active participation, providing meeting spaces, falsifying documents, participating in unlicensed gatherings, transporting unmarked materials. Each request carries operational briefings that reveal organizational sophistication while demonstrating trust through shared sensitive information. Recipients discover cult operations encompass legitimate business networks and alternative social services that function more efficiently than imperial equivalents. the true name ledger evolves from simple administrative records into ritual archives containing complete genealogical data, voice pattern recordings, and detailed confessions obtained during increasingly formal ceremonies. Early entries required basic identification. Later pages demand ancestral names, sponsorship histories, the names of your dead, so the community can remember properly. Your signature grows longer. Your breathing patterns are noted during each recitation. Handlers call it mindfulness training. It is calibration for deeper binding protocols. Language performs the psychological work of moral disengagement. Imperial officials become hoarders, saboteurs, functionaries who profit from your hunger. Minor theft reframes as reclamation of stolen resources. Document fraud becomes correction of bureaucratic errors. Violence, when requested, is protective discipline against predators the Arbites ignore. Criminal acts acquire justification through alternative theological frameworks that position cult activities as higher moral imperatives than imperial compliance. The scarification sigils begin exerting stronger control as participants advance through service levels. Hesitation triggers persistent aching along geometric lines hidden beneath clothing. Sleep disturbances occur when separated from cult gatherings for extended periods. Appetite changes encourage attendance at communal meals, where further conditioning occurs through shared ritual consumption. Recipients discover they cannot return to previous lives due to accumulated legal vulnerabilities, social isolation from non-participants, and physiological dependencies that make independent survival increasingly difficult. The helpful strangers have become necessary masters through systematic erosion of alternatives. The fourth favor approaches. They call it a gathering of gratitude, where you must bring your names and your breath. The gathering of gratitude convenes in converted storage facilities, where imperial iconography receives subtle modifications that register as familiar while carrying heretical significance. Participants arrive believing they attend community appreciation ceremonies, the atmosphere celebratory rather than ominous. Shared meals and recognition speeches validate months of mutual support, while handlers position themselves strategically throughout the space, monitoring participants while maintaining appearances as fellow community members. The breath oath begins through guided breathing exercises, framed as stress reduction techniques. Participants approach individual stations equipped with narrow vessels wrapped in cold iron lattice, presented as traditional offering bowls for ancestral remembrance. Recording equipment disguised as vox casters captures voice patterns during group recitations, while hidden microphones within each vessel map breathing rhythms as precise acoustic signatures. Registration follows administrative procedure. You recite your full name, patronymics, place of origin, and the names of your dead so the community can account for remembrance properly. A clerk records cadence and volume on specialized equipment that measures respiratory patterns as waveforms. Another attendant warms the lattice-wrapped vessel, calling it purification against contamination. The language remains bureaucratic. The function is ritual binding. They coach your breath systematically. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 2, release on the name. The scarification site beneath your sleeve prickles in synchronization with the communal rhythm. Around you, others perform identical sequences until individual lungs become a single bellows, feeding an unseen mechanism. A handler speaks softly. Gratitude requires precision, Precision requires truth. Truth requires breath. Activation masquerades as blessing. As you exhale your lineage into the vessel, the lattice illuminates with capillary gleam. The inoculation scar warms to fever heat, then cools abruptly, leaving residual ache shaped like hidden geometry. Demonstration follows immediately. A short tone from the recording equipment triggers synchronized wincing throughout the room. Distance no longer guarantees freedom. Silence can be compelled through acoustic manipulation. The ceremony culminates in blood tasks tailored to individual profiles, gathered during months of observation. Criminal assignments appear as community service opportunities. Document falsification to help neighbors access denied benefits, theft of medical supplies for emergency distribution, assault against predators threatening vulnerable residents. Each task generates tangible community benefit, while creating legal vulnerabilities that make confession suicidal. The psychological breaking point occurs without ceremony. You cannot return to imperial institutions that denied you. Your records now show criminal activity. You cannot seek Arbeit's assistance. Your breath sits captured in vessels that respond to frequencies you cannot hear. Sleep brings dreams structured like instructions, scarification sites humming when you resist them. The helpful community has become a total institution, controlling existence through systematic elimination of alternatives. Forensic analysis of recovered ritual components reveals standardized manufacturing across multiple sectors. Identical latticework, uniform vessel dimensions, primers, printed in matching typesets suggest galaxy-wide coordination, treating individual communities as operational units within larger strategic frameworks. This represents industrial-scale conversion processing, rather than isolated fanaticism. The fourth favor is complete. Evidence accumulates suggesting coordinated mass events, where entire districts undergo simultaneous binding. Worse approaches, and it will arrive precisely on schedule. The fourth favor multiplies through social networks with mathematical precision. Individual binding creates recruitment engines, where bound participants cannot warn others without revealing their own complicity, while scarification sigils pulse with discomfort during resistance and relief when providing vulnerable acquaintances' names to handlers. Critical mass arrives when cult membership reaches 35% of local population, triggering accelerated social dynamics that transform voluntary participation into community standard. Institutional capture follows a practical sequence that exploits imperial service gaps systematically. Food distribution falls first as volunteer stewards redirect relief supplies to households attending meetings. Employment placement follows when foremen owing favors hire on cult recommendation rather than guild approval. Informal justice completes the circuit. Those harming marked participants discover doors closing, permits expiring, Arbeit's attention redirected elsewhere. The law remains unchanged, legitimacy relocates. The normalization cascade operates through compliance advantages that make resistance economically suicidal. Unmarked citizens experience bureaucratic friction, extended waiting periods, lost documentation, missing deliveries. The marked navigate systems effortlessly. Ritual phrases become standard greetings. Ecclesiarchy sermons praising mutual assistance replace warnings against syncretism to retain congregants. Community standards evolve to accommodate practices that would have horrified earlier populations. cult handlers manufacture community crises requiring collective protective responses. Warehouse fires coincide with grain shortages. Stim scarcity appears during fever outbreaks. Aid mobilizes with miraculous efficiency through synchronized networks, while Imperial services fail predictably. Everyone eats, everyone heals, and afterwards everyone attends Thanksgiving ceremonies, where attendance receives careful documentation. Refusal feels treasonous to neighbors, rather than defiant of heretical authority. Preparations for mass conversion proceed through logistical channels disguised as crisis response. Communion materials distribute as emergency rations, earthen bowls for household remembrance, bread containing trace psychoactive compounds that lower resistance while enhancing warp susceptibility, water vessels sealed with ritual wax. Distribution schedules align with shift rotations across adjacent districts, ensuring thousands remain home, fed and ready at synchronized timing. Communication protocols coordinate simultaneous ceremonies across multiple sectors, suggesting sophisticated command structures, treating individual communities as operational components within hive-wide conversion machinery. Hidden observation posts in converted Imperial facilities allow leadership remote ceremony direction while maintaining plausible participation as ordinary community members. The scale overwhelms Imperial detection capabilities through sheer distributed coordination. Scarification sites throughout the district pulse in synchronized rhythm as the appointed hour approaches. Bound participants experience physiological compulsion to attend, while unbound residents follow social pressure patterns that make absence socially impossible. The feast preparations complete, hundreds will gather, believing they reclaim dignity from bureaucratic neglect, asserting community strength against Imperial abandonment. They carry their names and breath to what appears as liberation. The vessels wait, lattice-wrapped and calibrated for harvest on an industrial scale. The vessels pulse in synchronized rhythm as 800 residents of Hive Secundus Sector Gamma 9 converge on the converted manufactory floor, carrying righteous anger against data clerks who denied their petitions and Medicoi who rationed their children's treatments. The feast begins as community assertion. We feed ourselves when the Imperium fails us. Marla Voss arranges communion bread on distribution tables, while her scarification site thrums with anticipation. 3 months ago, cult agents secured medical treatment for her daughter's respiratory infections after Imperial Medici declared the condition non-critical. The bread feels warm in her hands, carrying trace psychoactive compounds that will lower psychological defenses while enhancing warp susceptibility. She believes she distributes nourishment to neighbors. The handlers positioned throughout the crowd understand she dispenses spiritual preparation for mass binding. The ceremony begins with familiar gratitude exercises, framed as hunger protest. Participants breathe in coordinated rhythm while reciting names of community members who provided assistance during Imperial abandonment. Servo skulls orbit overhead with ink-stained quills, their auspexes capturing voice patterns as statistical traces. The scarification sites of bound participants synchronize their pulse patterns, creating sympathetic resonance that spreads through unmarked attendees via proximity conditioning. 800 people become a single respiratory system, feeding hidden machinery. Jorik Mendez, unemployed dock worker, approaches the first vessel station, carrying his full name and the names of his dead parents. The lattice-wrapped bowl appears identical to hundreds distributed as household remembrance aids, but connects to recording equipment mapping vocal patterns as permanent control frequencies. He speaks clearly into the vessel, while acoustic sensors capture respiratory rhythms as binding signatures. Around him, families share small talk, while children chase through the crowd, their laughter echoing off high ceilings. The psychoactive compounds take effect gradually, creating euphoric group bonding while reducing individual resistance. Participants experience profound emotional connection to neighbors as handlers emerge from concealed positions throughout the space, no longer disguised as fellow community members, but revealed as ceremony directors. The transformation feels natural rather than threatening. These are the helpful strangers who never failed them. Ash lines traced across the floor guide feet into positions calculated weeks ago. The ritual geometry positions everyone within overlapping control fields, while cult leadership begins mass breath oath through amplified instruction carrying subsonic frequencies. Bound participants' synchronized compliance creates behavioral modeling that unmarked attendees follow through social conformity pressure. Individual voices merge into collective recitation. We speak our names to those who remember us. The lattice vessels illuminate simultaneously as 800 exhalations feed warp-conductive material arranged in geometric patterns. Temperature drops while sweat beads. Lumen globes stutter out of phase, casting the space in alternating frames like corrupted memory. Machine spirits complain in arrhythmic clicks. The scarification sites of bound participants flare with heat, then extend influence to unmarked attendees through proximity contagion. Realization arrives in waves as participants discover they cannot stop speaking, cannot leave positions, cannot resist compulsions flowing through breath voluntarily surrendered. Marla watches neighbors' faces transform from celebration to horror as understanding penetrates psychoactive haze. Children cry while parents find themselves unable to comfort them, voices locked into continuing recitation of binding oaths they never intended to speak. The warp disturbance manifests as localized reality fluctuation, allowing demonic influence to flow through the crowd without requiring full manifestation. Participants experience their gratitude transformed into worship, their community solidarities converted to spiritual bondage operating through willing submission rather than external coercion. The binding feels like choice, even as choice disappears. The ceremony concludes with 800 new slaves who understand precisely what they have become. The helpful community revealed its true nature, a harvesting operation converting Imperial failures into chaos resources through systematic exploitation of human desperation. The feast of dignity became a feast of chains, willingly accepted because alternatives had been systematically eliminated. The manufactory empties slowly as participants return to homes they no longer own, carrying breath, patterns that respond to frequencies they cannot hear. The newly enslaved must now learn to live with their transformed reality. The manufactory empties, but the transformation continues through administrative restructuring that mirrors Imperial bureaucracy while serving chaos objectives. Within hours, duty rosters appear on converted message boards. Familiar titles emerge: Quartermaster, Shift Supervisor, Compliance Monitor, Community Liaison. The helpful strangers reveal themselves as permanent management, their authority now explicit rather than implied through favors. Marla Voss receives a brass stamp and ledger books, appointed district quartermaster responsible for food distribution. The system operates through clay tokens pressed with lattice motifs that sing faintly when rubbed. The sound aligns with breath oath frequencies recorded during binding. Ration access requires token presentation and vocal authentication matching captured voice patterns. Her scarification site pulses with approval when she denies requests from unmarked residents, aches when she considers mercy. The body learns compliance before the mind accepts enslavement. Jorik Mendez reports to compliance monitors wearing repurposed Arbeits equipment with Aquilus filed smooth. His assignments include night patrols and extractions, retrieving neighbors who miss mandatory assemblies. When he hesitates during his first extraction, a subsonic tone from hidden speakers triggers synchronized pain across his scarification site. Relief comes only through task completion. Distance provides no protection. Acoustic control operates throughout the district. Daily routines establish total dependency through systematic replacement of Imperial services. Housing assignments require cult approval. Employment flows through handlers who evaluate loyalty alongside competence. Medical treatment becomes conditional on attendance at wellness assemblies where breathing exercises recalibrate scarification responses. Children attend remembrance schools where instructors teach literacy using family genealogies as primers, embedding generational control through educational conditioning. The recruitment factory activates as enslaved populations become intelligence-gathering assets with specialized knowledge of Imperial vulnerabilities. Marla's medical training provides access to Medicaid facilities for supply diversion and contamination operations. Jorik's dock experience enables cargo manifest falsification and shipping schedule manipulation. Each enslaved individual receives quotas, 3 new contacts per fortnight introduced to aid circles beyond the district. Refusal triggers escalating pain. Success brings temporary relief from scarification discomfort. Operational security maintains facades through coordinated performance when Imperial authorities investigate. Arbeits patrols encounter communities that appear functional, even prosperous. Citizens provide polite, synchronized responses while scarification sites compel perfect behavioral compliance. Genuine dissent disappears through pain conditioning that makes resistance literally unbearable. The cult becomes invisible institution masked by hyper-efficient social services that exceed Imperial performance standards. Administrative integration conceals criminal activities through legitimate documentation. Sealed crates arrive bearing authentic guild seals, delivering ritual components disguised as industrial supplies. Merchant lighters transport donations under stamped permits, while carrying enslaved individuals to other sectors as contracted laborers. Numbers balance, signatures authenticate, and hunger keeps questions minimal. The transformed district functions as operational node within larger networks spanning multiple sectors. True name ledgers consolidate into central archives that cross-reference with off-world manifests. Individual enslavement scales into systematic harvest operations, treating human communities as renewable resources for galaxy-wide chaos objectives. The helpful community has become a processing facility, where Imperial failures convert into strategic assets through industrial-scale exploitation of human desperation. The processing facility operates through logistics networks that exploit Imperial commerce as perfect camouflage for galaxy-spanning infrastructure. This is not sabotage, but systemic mimicry. Cults embed within legitimate institutions, parasiting existing networks to move resources, information, and human cargo across vast distances without triggering detection protocols. The invisible architecture transforms individual district operations into coordinated, strategic assets serving chaos objectives with industrial precision. Merchant Guild infiltration provides essential transportation infrastructure through compromised shipping cartels that maintain authentic Imperial contracts while serving dual purposes. Guild seals arrive pre-impressed by compliant clerks upstream, permits stamped by corrupted administratum officials who receive efficiency bonuses disguised as bribes. Cargo manifests authenticate routine freight while concealing ritual components, lattice work disguised as conduit bracing, cold iron vessels declared as refinery spares, psychoactive compounds booked as medici supplies for facilities that process different kinds of healing. Captain Vex Hollowell operates licensed freight services between sectors, her deadweight tonnage reserved for ballast, becoming inventory space for true-name ledgers consolidated from dozens of districts. Voice pattern recordings travel on crystalline matrices catalogued as communication equipment. Enslaved populations relocate as contracted agricultural laborers under authenticated indenture documents. Machine spirits receive placating litanies, while heretical ciphers ride within inventory checksum lines, invisible to standard audit procedures. Financial systems supporting these operations exploit bureaucratic complexity through systematic resource diversion that remains below detection thresholds. Minor ecclesiarchy positions provide access to tithe collection records, enabling precise calculation of surplus amounts that disappear without triggering investigation protocols. Skimmed tithe scrip accumulates in parish alms boxes that reconcile perfectly on paper, while bleeding coins into parallel ledgers written in devotional shorthand. Double-entry bookkeeping records, full compliance for diocesan audits while tracking the true economy. Favors granted, breaths held, service quotas met. The true name ledgers function as commodities traded between cult cells, like agricultural futures or mineral rights. Voice pattern recordings carry market valuations based on demographic profiles and strategic positioning within imperial institutions. Enslaved medici personnel command premium prices due to facility access. Corrupted Arbites provide intelligence worth substantial credit transfers. Children's genealogies sell cheaply but appreciate rapidly as subjects mature into useful positions. Each ledger page becomes a navigational beacon for sorcerers who read the warp through human lineage, requiring no demonic manifestation, only whispered names to draw presences close enough to listen. Communication protocols bind the network through coded catechisms, moving along Vox networks as routine devotional traffic. A phrase misplaced, a pause on the third response. And handlers know shipment status or patrol routes. Astropathic whispers piggyback on sanctioned transmissions within liturgical prefaces, brief enough to vanish beneath checksum tolerance. Servo skulls ferry memory slates between hive spires, using hospice exemptions that keep customs officials respectful and incurious. Standardization exposes transhuman design. Across 17 sectors, seized primers share identical typesets and pagination, Ritual vessels match dimensions to the 10th millimeter. Lattice inscriptions echo devotional faults, as if written by hands that forgot how mortals err. Intelligence analysts speak privately of fallen space marines or demon princes treating recruitment as standardized manufacture, coordinating operations that span systems while maintaining perfect institutional camouflage. The cult's greatest protection remains usefulness within systems measuring, virtue by throughput. Quartermasters deliver early, compliance forms arrive ahead of schedule, tithe quotas exceed requirements. Auditors praise efficiency and mark districts as low risk, diverting scrutiny toward louder failures. Detection begins as anomaly, seals with wrong wax, harmonics in Vox transmissions, fuel consumption that should balance differently. This invisible infrastructure operates in 23% of surveyed Imperial worlds, with recruitment rates exceeding natural population growth in frontier sectors, where Imperial services maintain minimal presence. The high networks transform individual enslavement into galaxy-spanning harvest operations that convert Imperial systemic failures into strategic resources for chaos forces through ruthlessly efficient exploitation of human desperation. Imperial intelligence services begin noticing patterns that suggest coordination beyond individual fanaticism. Imperial intelligence services notice patterns, but institutional paranoia transforms detection into competition between agencies that prioritize territorial claims over coordinated response. When Vox harmonics, tithe ledgers, and shipping manifests align across sectors, 3 different organizations write 3 different warrants. The Ordo Hereticus maintains jurisdiction over heretical activity, Arbeits claim authority over criminal conspiracy, and ecclesiarchy investigators assert doctrinal oversight of theological deviation. Each hoards intelligence, while cults exploit coordination gaps to relocate operations during bureaucratic disputes. Inquisitor Voldris Caney arrives at Hive Secundus with requisition orders spanning 17 districts, her retinue equipped with acoustic analysis equipment, calibrated to detect scarification resonance frequencies. The investigation proceeds through systematic population screening, using voice pattern analysis and thermal imaging to identify ritual markings. Detection rates achieve 93% accuracy within controlled environments, but field conditions reduce effectiveness as subjects learn to modulate breathing patterns and mask thermal signatures through clothing modifications. Arbeits response doctrine emphasizes shock and sever over surgical extraction. Commander Voss deploys riot suppression teams with flame units and crowd dispersal munitions, cordoning affected sectors while conducting building-by-building searches. Streets become choke points, hab stacks open like filing cabinets, and citizens pass through triage. Innocent, suspect, contaminated. Compliance sticks hum at frequencies that imitate cult compulsion signals. Many collapse in conditioned response, confirming suspicions through involuntary physiological reactions. Ecclesiarchy purity audits follow with incense and administrative forms. Confessors assemble queues that unspool for hours, offering absolution for information. Cardinal Vex conducts mass purification ceremonies, requiring vocal participation from entire populations, using acoustic monitoring to identify individuals whose scarification responses create detectable physiological anomalies during orthodox litanies. The process identifies cultists effectively, but requires weeks of preparation while mobile cult cells relocate beyond investigation zones. Institutional competition sabotages effective response as agencies dispute jurisdiction over discovered assets. Files duplicate, then diverge. Evidence chains break at the exact moment careers require victories. Ordo Hereticus claims cult leaders for interrogation, while Arbites demand criminal prosecution of trafficking operations. Ecclesiarchy investigators insist on theological examination of recovered materials. Witnesses vanish during transfer disputes, and operational intelligence becomes obsolete during bureaucratic negotiations. When containment fails, the calculus escalates. Planetary enforcers request guard support they will not receive in time. The Ordo prefers containment to battle. Void ships adjust orbit and speak in the old language of sanction. Districts vanish inside precise ellipses of light, and with them the proof of how the system works. Memory becomes the true contraband, eliminated through orbital fire. The tragic irony emerges through systematic analysis. Imperial countermeasures create more recruitment opportunities than they eliminate. In Hive Tertius Sector K7, where cult mutual aid societies once flourished, an Ordo Hereticus purge eliminated 14,000 citizens. The subsequent vacuum filled within weeks as new cult cells offered grief counseling and resettlement assistance to survivors. Purge operations destroy communities and create new populations of desperate survivors. Mass arrests separate families and eliminate community leaders, creating power vacuums that cult organizers fill through competent service delivery. Statistical analysis reveals institutional failure scope. Cult recruitment rates exceed Imperial counter-recruitment efforts by margins approaching 3-to-1 in affected sectors. Detection methods identify individual cultists, but fail to map organizational networks that relocate operations faster than Imperial responses coordinate. The hunters become unwitting shepherds, driving prey toward predators who understand Imperial limitations intimately. From the camps and spored tenements emerge the marked, people who survived both kinds of ritual, chaos, and compliance. They carry scarification sites that resist standard purification techniques, physiological changes that make normal life impossible. From the camps and spared tenements emerge the marked, people who survived both kinds of ritual, chaos, and compliance. They carry scarification sites that resist standard purification techniques, physiological changes that make normal life impossible, and the bitter knowledge that rescue can feel indistinguishable from continued punishment. Marla Voss sits in Rehabilitation Center Tertius 7, her scarification site a persistent ache that flares during Imperial liturgies and subsides only during silence. Medicae rinse the geometric lines with solvents and run Vox pulse ablation over the patterns. Sensitivity diminishes for hours, then returns keyed to the same forbidden frequencies. The scarification maintains elevated temperature and electrical conductivity that registers on standard medical equipment. Breath catches during hymnals that share harmonics with binding tones. Sleep brings dreams structured like instructions she cannot forget. Imperial rehabilitation programs operate through systematic isolation, disguised as protective custody. Purity bracelets log respiration and location, transmitting breath patterns to precinct cogitators for anomaly detection. Housing assignments place the marked together in monitored facilities to simplify surveillance, while preventing contamination of unmarked populations. Employment contracts include clauses barring proximity to sensitive facilities. Ration allotments arrive with identification chits marking bearers as monitored for persistent corruption. Social reintegration proves impossible due to community fear and institutional suspicion. Former neighbors view survivors with suspicion, their exposure to heresy a contagion that cannot be cleansed. Employment opportunities vanish as no guild risks imperial scrutiny by hiring known cult associates. Marriage licenses require genetic screening and mandatory sterilization to prevent hereditary transmission of suspected corruption. The marked discover they cannot return to imperial orthodoxy that their bodies reject through conditioned responses. Relief exists, but its providers operate after curfew. Black market medici sell countertones that dampen scar responses for limited periods. The vials arrive without labels, creating new dependencies that replace old ones. Support circles meet in basements, where facilitators teach breathing patterns that skirt binding frequencies. They call it healing. The counter-signal tastes like copper and makes dreams crystalline. Many marked individuals eventually seek out new cult cells, unable to cope with isolation and chronic pain that only heretical practices seem to alleviate. They become secondary recruitment pools of experienced individuals who understand imperial countermeasures intimately. Their knowledge of surveillance methods, patrol routes, and interrogation techniques makes them valuable assets for organizations that view human desperation as renewable resource. The rehabilitation system creates more problems than it solves, transforming survivors into permanent institutional dependents while failing to address underlying conditions that made cult recruitment possible. Imperial paranoia ensures the marked cannot warn others about cult methodology without revealing their own complicity, making effective prevention impossible. This individual tragedy scales into systematic process, revealing deeper institutional failures that perpetuate the cycle. This individual tragedy scales into systematic process through mechanisms that operate with industrial precision across imperial space, revealing the Imperium's own structural contradictions as the primary recruitment engine for chaos cults. The rehabilitation system creates more problems than it solves, but this represents design rather than accident. Each institutional failure generates precisely the conditions cults exploit, while imperial responses inadvertently amplify recruitment opportunities through predictable feedback loops. Statistical analysis exposes the scope through fragmentary intelligence reports that paint an incomplete but alarming picture. Cult activity operates in 23% of surveyed imperial worlds, with recruitment rates exceeding natural population growth in frontier sectors, where imperial services maintain minimal presence. Each purged district creates approximately 40% more vulnerable individuals than it eliminates through systematic destruction of community support networks and creation of traumatized survivor populations. The mathematics prove inexorable. Imperial countermeasures produce more cultists than they destroy. Treat this as supply chain analysis operating at galactic scale. Raw materials flow predictably. Withdrawn services generate administrative gaps. Empty pantries create nutritional desperation. Untreated wounds foster medical abandonment. Unfiled petitions breed institutional resentment. Processing follows documented protocols we have traced. Surveillance disguised as service. favors calibrated to specific deficits, scarification that trains bodies before minds understand, breath oaths that convert gratitude into controllable frequencies. Outputs become quotas measured in ledgers and shipping schedules, 3 new contacts per fortnight, 1 genealogical archive per district, work crews relocated off-world under authenticated papers. Bureaucratic indifference, enshrined in administratum protocols, ensures resource misallocation that creates chronic scarcity by design rather than accident. Tithes flow to distant war efforts while local populations starve according to calculated priorities. Housing lotteries operate as social control mechanisms rather than equitable distribution systems. Medici facilities triage based on productivity metrics that code human suffering as acceptable losses. These systemic inefficiencies are not bugs but features, generating the precise unmet needs that cults specialize in fulfilling through competent service delivery. The Eternal Harvest serves strategic objectives beyond simple follower acquisition through coordinated operations that suggest transhuman intelligence organizing recruitment as standardized manufacture. Mass-binding rituals create warp-accessible populations that allow demonic influence without requiring full manifestation. True name ledgers function as navigational beacons, traded between cells-like commodity futures, guiding chaos forces through the Imperium, using human genealogies as coordinates. Navigation by genealogy allows sorcerers to move influence along family memory, without the theatrics that attract imperial attention. Economic analysis reveals cult operations generate positive returns on investment through systematic exploitation of imperial resource allocation inefficiencies. Skimmed tithes fund recruitment operations that capture additional tithe sources. Diverted supplies support cult infrastructure while creating shortages that drive more recruitment. The system becomes self-sustaining through parasitic efficiency that exceeds imperial institutional performance, creating competitive advantages that make resistance economically suicidal for desperate populations. Frontier worlds demonstrate the process at accelerated scale, where imperial contradictions compress into observable timeframes. Colony ships arrive with populations already stressed by transport conditions and resource limitations. Imperial administrators establish extraction quotas before infrastructure development, prioritizing tithe obligations over basic services that might prevent cult infiltration. Within standard years, alternative authorities emerge offering competent solutions, while imperial institutions fail predictably according to documented patterns. The opening statistics acquire new meaning through systematic context that transforms cold numbers into quantifiable measures of imperial self-destruction. 73% of cult recruits from zones of triple service withdrawal represents imperial policy outcomes rather than random targeting. 68% bearing ritual scarification marks the end point of recruitment processes that begin with imperial institutional betrayal. 4 favors free, the 5th binding forever. Each number represents systematic failure of imperial civilization converted into strategic advantage for chaos forces through ruthlessly efficient exploitation of human desperation. The Imperium creates its own enemies through structural contradictions that make cult recruitment inevitable rather than aberrant. The Eternal Harvest feeds on imperial civilization itself, converting the machinery of oppression into recruitment infrastructure, that operates with industrial precision across surveyed space. Hope becomes a commodity, priced by those who control its distribution, and that price remains constant, written in ledger margins and healed welts that mark the willing slaves. The cycle perpetuates because both systems serve their foundational directives perfectly. The Imperium extracts resources measured in ore and bodies. Cults extract consent measured in breaths spoken into cold iron. What remains is the final accounting, the price these promises demand from those who refuse them, and whether escape remains possible for ordinary Imperial citizens trapped within this machinery of desperation. What remains is the final accounting, the price these promises demand from those who refuse them, and whether escape remains possible for ordinary Imperial citizens trapped within this machinery of desperation. The cycle perpetuates because both systems serve their foundational directives perfectly, creating a galaxy where hope itself becomes weaponized against those who dare to need it. The scarification mark returns with complete understanding. It represents not just individual enslavement, but the commodification of human desperation through industrial processes that convert Imperial systemic failures into strategic resources for chaos. Each geometric line carved beneath clothing marks the transformation of a person into a data point, their genealogy into navigation coordinates, their breath into controllable frequency. The mark signifies complete surrender of agency, disguised as empowerment through community participation. The promises offered by cults are revealed as the cruelest form of slavery. Hope extended at compound interest rates that accumulate through physiological conditioning, social isolation, and legal vulnerability until repayment becomes impossible. The helpful stranger who never failed you transforms into the master who owns your breath, your genealogy, your capacity to warn others. Freedom becomes a memory maintained through constant pain. Imperial civilization creates its own enemies through structural contradictions that make cult recruitment inevitable rather than aberrant. Each purge creates more recruitment opportunities. Each institutional failure generates new substrate populations. Each withdrawn service opens space where competent alternatives establish credibility through superior performance. The Imperium cannot reform itself without ceasing to be what it is. And it will not. If survival remains possible, it operates through procedural discipline, not redemption. Count your favors carefully. Refuse the fourth boon, regardless of hunger. Never speak your full name and the names of your dead into any vessel, bowl, or recording device. Trust no help that arrives immediately after disaster. Genuine aid requires time to organize, while cult responses demonstrate suspicious efficiency. Breathe off-tempo when told to inhale together during group activities. Test tokens by rubbing them. If they hum, discard them where no one can hear. Sit near exits. Never stand inside ash lines traced on floors. If you must sign documents, misspell something you can remember to correct later. Corrupt the ledger before it corrupts you. These are not rules for freedom. They are instructions for delaying capture. In the 41st millennium, you survive by remaining illegible to systems that read desperation as opportunity. The final image returns to where this examination began. A new recruitment operation, beginning in Sector Kappa 12, where 3 Imperial services withdrew within the past standard year. A stranger approaches with protein bars, medical supplies, and employment applications. someone exhales their name into cold iron. The cycle continues, efficient as ever, fed by the Imperium's own contradictions. The harvest remains perpetual and inescapable, counting breaths until the ledger closes.